You're listening to The Novice Experience, a podcast that explores the opportunities and challenges commonly encountered by students and young people. I'm Calvin Chan, and chatting with my guests, I'm going to take a deep dive into their meaningful stories, the lessons they've learned, and how they can inspire others. Let's get going. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Novice Experience. I'm your host, Calvin Chan. This is part 2 of our conversation with Hsieh. He is the host and producer of the Uncooked Rice Show, a podcast that explores the journeys, experiences, and insights of Gen Z Asian Americans. Jesse is currently studying economic policy and minoring in psychology at Carleton University, located in Ottawa. Jesse, last week we talked about how young high school students can explore their passions and interests and get some clarity on what they like, and how to transfer that to picking the specific academic programs and schools that they want to enroll in after high school. And this week, we're going to talk about relationships. So, how young people can network, approach people, and socialize, and how having a community of friends and professionals around you can really propel you to the next step in terms of your academics and career. So, welcome back to the show.
Thanks again for having me.
So let's start off with a little bit of your experience. Obviously, in high school, you ended off with being a student council president. And that's not an easy task to achieve, because you really have to be personable. You really have to understand um, what your classmates expect of you and what it means to hold that title in terms of being in the senior class at high school. So how was that experience for you? Running for president, but also being in that position for a whole school year.
Well, I'll start off by saying this. I really wish I could say, like the whole experience is really, uh, I guess, something of, how do I phrase this properly? I wish I could say that the whole experience of me being president was something that could easily be compared to, being the president of the United States or prime minister, right? But in actuality, it was just the same as being a club executive, right, of any other club.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the biggest rewarding aspects of it was definitely being able to develop my own leadership skills, plan events, work, practice on my event project management skills, and as well as, being able to mentor other kids younger than me, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was definitely I guess for me, I would say it was definitely, um, I'm like at a loss of words. For me, I would say I enjoy being club president because it not only brought me the opportunities to improve myself, but improve others as well, and to help them grow as well as helping myself grow all along in that process.
Was it challenging for you to develop relationships with people at school that you probably didn't know? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of younger students who look up to you because you're in grade 12 and you're student council president.
Mhm.
Was it hard to connect with people that you weren't familiar with?
I would say to begin with, yes. I think I was better equipped at it because before running for president, I was also involved in other clubs at school, right? And so I had already tried to practice those kinds of social skills. But I'm sure you know, because you were also an alumni where we went to school, that the environment there is pretty friendly. I would
Hmm.
say, the older grades typically provide a much more friendlier environment for the younger grades too, especially since we have, events like grade 8 camp, and there's just a general sense of companionship and camaraderie too. Like, would you agree?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like our high school was a really good community, and obviously our former principal really um, instilled the values of care and respect that really brought our school together, and really being mindful of other people and what they might be struggling with, and obviously having the empathy to reach out and help them. um, but I asked about student council president because you also mentioned project management
Mm.
and mentoring, and you obviously gained a lot of useful experiences from being president. How has that translated to you being in university now and you're participating in other extracurriculars? How has that transferred and translated to um, your strengths?
I think um, some skills that were transferred were definitely um, teamwork skills, communication skills.
Hmm.
And so being the president and being an executive of any club, there's a lot of trying to balance, your personality, your leadership style, your work style too, with other people's styles. And so that to me was the biggest transferable lesson that I've learned, especially now in university, if you join extracurriculars and other clubs too, maybe even group projects, I would say, there's a lot of time where you want to try to be able to give your input and give yourself into that work, but at the same time not rubbing off somebody the wrong way or like providing more conflict than cooperation, right? um,
Hmm.
for me in high school I really tried to hone those skills in which I could, I guess, manage to balance and work out that balance between people and between different types of people as well as different types of work styles or communication styles, right?
Right. And I find that really impressive how you realized all of that about yourself when you're in high school, because it didn't take until when I was in university, maybe even second year, for me to really learn about my true values and my strengths and weaknesses. And I think it takes some time and some deep thinking for someone to be able to reflect and internalize who they truly are. I feel like some people might skip over that, right? Like they're so outward that they don't actually understand themselves too much.
Yeah.
And I really valuing knowing about myself because obviously, like last week we talked about you liking to have control over your life and have that certainty. And I'm also the same way. Like I don't like uncertainty. I don't like winging things. But I feel like right, like I like to plan out stuff. I'm an organized person, but for me to be able to plan out what I want to do and what I truly like, I have to know myself first. And
Mhm.
I didn't come to realize that until, in the middle of my degree. So I found that really impressive how you realized and you did a lot of self-reflection in high school.
Yeah. And the thing is, I would say it's not a skill that most, I would say, kids have. And of course, it's beneficial, but it's not something that I feel, I guess, people should feel pressured to try to achieve because it doesn't
Hmm.
come easy, like as you said, right? It takes a lot
Hmm.
of deep thinking, a lot of time, and I would add on a lot of trial and error too, right?
Yeah.
Because, there's only so much you can learn about yourself through certain opportunities, right? You have to keep
Hmm.
exploring, you have to keep trying different styles or different, ways of thinking or doing things until you realize and can piece together what works for you and what works best for you, right?
Yeah. And speaking of like learning about ourselves, like I've always thought that I was an introvert because I don't really like big crowds. I feel tired from speaking and interacting with people. I like to recharge my batteries, individually, and like lock myself in my room and do whatever I want. Um, but slowly I realized that it wasn't so bad. Like I'm able to connect with people. I like socializing. I understand the importance of networking, and I'm presentable. I can talk about myself and I can ask questions. So I realized there's a term called ambivert, right? Like you're sort of in between the two, and that's how it should be, because the problem with things like the Myers-Briggs test is that it labels you on one side of the spectrum, and at the end of the day it's a spectrum, so
Hmm.
you land somewhere in between, most likely, right? Like probability says you'd land somewhere in between of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's dangerous when schools teach us those types of personality tests, and it puts a label on us and makes us believe that we're a certain way, and that I felt personally instilled a fear in my head, right? An uncertainty, like, oh, I'm an introvert. I can't talk with people. I'm socially inept. I should be afraid when I meet new people. And I feel like you've already lost when you think that way, right? Like when you meet someone new, especially someone who's like much more qualified and experienced than you, like you've already lost if you feel like you're inferior, right?
That, yeah, exactly.
And so, like, I wanted to ask about you. Like, did you have an experience with, learning about your personality and then having that label for many many years, and then suddenly like realizing like what the heck, like I'm actually like not this type of person. I like this and that. This wasn't me for all the years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say I have gone through that experience because, like you said, schools often, not just schools, but, your peers sometimes will teach you these things like the Myers-Briggs test or, the idea that somebody is an introvert or an extrovert, but they don't really understand that it's not, s- it's not one thing, right? It's a lot of the times these tests, whether it's on personality, it's, they label it either introvert, extrovert, but in reality, it's you're on a spectrum, and then you could technically you're introvert if you're more likely to do something rather than you're not. But people forget that it's a more likely thing on a that kind of scale rather than it's a you are this person, you are that person, right?
Hmm.
For me, it's like when I was growing up, I always thought I was an introvert too, right? Just because I guess I enjoyed spending time at home in my room playing video games. The idea of going to parties didn't really intrigue me in a way where extroverts are stereotypically party goers. People who drink a
Yeah.
lot, party a lot, have fun, that kind of thing. So that didn't interest me. Um, but then because I didn't like those kinds of stuff and I labeled myself an introvert, I guess I thought I had to fit in with the other requirements of being an introvert. So stuff like you don't really like talking to people, or you're not very good at talking to people, and so I felt confused, right?
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I started, um, I guess, getting past that idea of a label where I realized that it's less about trying to fit into a box or fit into a certain type of person, but rather exploring who you are and your interests on a level that you can think of as in I enjoy doing this from time to time, but I would much rather do that, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. And how do we overcome fear, in your opinion? And I guess in a social context, it's fear of socializing, fear of stuttering and tripping up while you're talking, fear of being judged, fear of, I guess, like how people see you.
Right.
I remember when I was meeting new people in my first year networking event, like I was
Mhm.
blushing. My
Right.
face, my whole face was red, and then I got even more scared because like, oh, I was fearing how other people were seeing me and how I was presenting myself. It got worse, right? Like I said, you've already lost if you're scared stepping in. So how do we overcome that fear before we even set foot in a socializing setting?
Right. So I guess I'll start out by saying this. I used to have, and I still technically do, but I used to have a really large fear of embarrassment or being judged by other people. And so
Hmm.
that was a really, I guess, detrimental aspect of my life because I would go into social settings and be that awkward kid in the corner of the room,
Yeah.
not really knowing what to say or how to start a conversation, right? And so I and that happened because I was so scared of messing up when I was talking to somebody or embarrassing myself because um, it was just something that confined me, right? And so for me, how I started to try to get over it was I started to realize that you know yes, people judge. Yes, people will critique. People will, laugh at jokes, and oftentimes kids will do that because they're kids. They don't know any better, and a lot of them are very, I guess, in a way, mean, right? But as I started getting older, as I started getting um, more involved in my community and meeting new people, I started to realize, that a small group of kids who judge or like make you feel like you're being judged isn't representative of everyone else, right? When I started getting to clubs and started meeting people with similar interests to me, I started realizing that my fear of being embarrassed was really, really absurd because I was afraid of being laughed at by people who weren't the same as who I was, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so
Eh,
it was definitely about taking a step towards the right groups of people. Did I start to overcome that fear? And I would also go on to say that it was actually um, after I got more involved, I had younger kids and younger volunteers come up to me when I was an executive, asking me for my opinions, and I was so, I guess, in a way, stunned by their bravery because I would have never thought at their age that I would be able to go up to, I guess, a person yet older than me and ask them questions, right? Um,
Hmm.
and seeing their, I guess, in a way, quote unquote, bravery made me realize that, I'm not judging them. So why would anyone really judge me if I go up and ask them questions or, talk to them as a stranger, right? So I guess,
Yeah,
yeah, in a sense, like it wasn't until I was on the other end of the shoe or other end of the table. I guess I forgot the saying, but do you know what I mean?
yeah, I totally do, and I think what you're trying to describe is maturity. Because for me, a good example that you use is among when we were younger and among other kids, being judged in the classroom or in the playground. And I guess when we're younger, like all we're trying to do is impress people, right? Impress our parents, impress our peers, impress our teachers, what have you, right?
Right,
And we're constantly being judged as a kid and being labeled as good, bad, hardworking, not so hardworking, right? Like all our lives we're spent being judged by people and trying to impress them and
right,
trying to get like, the good, quote unquote, good label.
mhm,
But then I started as I got older and, started to have like more mature way of thinking is that, um, everyone's gets judged. But the most successful people, they really, don't give a shit, right? Like they,
exactly, yeah,
like it really doesn't matter because when you go home at the end of the day, like people don't even remember that interaction that they had with you, and you're struggling with yourself for like, the next 24 hours about like, oh, how did I blow up that conversation? Like people don't even remember anymore.
mhm,
And I feel like and also another thing is that as I had more mature thinking, I started to realize that I would regret not doing something more than if I failed at a particular thing that I tried doing. Did that make sense? Sort of like, I would have regretted it more if I stopped myself from doing something out of fear than if I tried out something and I failed miserably.
yeah,
Right. So then I started. That's how I overcome the fear because it was the fear of losing out, like FOMO, than fear of like failing,
right,
basically. So I know that like relationships and connections with experienced professionals are obviously like super important because they provide, different perspectives, advice, and they have individual experiences
mhm,
that are super valuable to young people. But how should students effectively approach these connections?
right. That's a good question, and I guess I'll preface by saying this: I am in no way perfect at this, and I haven't mastered this skill,
Hmm.
I guess, at all because I'm still a student trying to get more connections every day, right? But from what I've learned and what I've heard from other mentors and other students my age is that you know people at a certain age after high school, definitely university, after that they have so much information inside them, so much knowledge that they would be more than happy to share with people, right? And so a lot of the people that I talk to, especially mentors that get asked questions a lot, they always say that it's always a delight to hear from people, especially when people reach out to them, right? Because it's not like kids are messaging them asking for like millions of dollars or like asking to do a miracle, right? It's literally
Hmm.
often, most of the time, it's just a talk. Sometimes it's an hour long, sometimes it's less than that or more than that, but it's just a talk. It's pretty much free information, right? And a lot of people like talking, especially if about themselves, right? So if, I guess, anyone listening is concerned that people don't want to talk to you or don't want to share their information, that's most of the time it's complete bullshit. Most of the time people are more than happy to talk to you about their own life skills or their own experiences.
Yeah, and I think one thing, and this doesn't always apply, and it's not always readily available, but I feel like to approach someone effectively, I feel like is to be able to describe how you'll provide value.
Right,
It's really ironic because you're looking for value yourself, but you have to think about ways of providing value for the other person. And so, uh, sometimes if you're looking for a job when you're older, then I think you can say, how I'm going to make you money if I join your company, right? But if you're just looking for like mentoring and help, I feel like you can voice how you'll be valuable in terms of how you'll contribute to that particular community itself. So not just that person, but also maybe a particular community, academic community, company, or what have you, right? Like you have to say like, I have, this particular experience as a young student. This is why I'm passionate about it. Um, this is how you helping me will take me to the next step and have me be able to be part of your community and provide value. I
Right.
don't know about that was too complicated, but in a sense, you can't be asking for help all the time because people are busy. And some people just don't like working with people. But um, it's important that we are able to describe how we bring value. And that goes back to knowing about ourselves, right?
Right. And that's the thing too. It's, I guess, I would say like being able to provide value. That's something that a lot of experienced networkers like to tell. Aspiring individuals, especially students, right, who are looking to get into more networking. But um, it also relates to the fear of a lot of young students too, right? It's because they
Hmm.
don't know what value they could provide most of the time, right? Especially if you're
Yeah.
a student, you're in high school, university, you don't really have much life experience you could offer, or you don't really think you have a lot of life experience you could offer to somebody who's 40 years down the road in their career, right?
Hmm.
And it's a common misconception because as a student, that's one of the biggest, I think, values you could provide, because a student's insight is something that, to me personally, feels extremely valuable, right? Because students make up a large, especially young kids, make up a large percentage of the population, and they're essentially the next generation of people who will provide for a lot of different industries, right? And it's, as you said, it's not a lot. It's about not always asking for help, but also trying to provide insight. And so
Yeah.
it's hard trying to balance that as a student, especially if you're afraid. And so I would ask you, like, Calvin, how have you tried to get over that fear, or like that misunderstanding?
Um, Well, I feel like it's hard. It's not easy to say how you provide value because when you're talking to professionals, they're looking for like technical value, right? Like
Right,
how are you
exactly.
gonna help me get this thing done, right? Like technical skills. So I feel like um, going back to what we said earlier, understanding who I am, my values, my experience, and my strengths and weaknesses really helped me be able to voice my soft skills, my transferable skills that can contribute to whoever I'm talking to, and understanding that it's not me that's incompetent, it's where I am in my age, right? Like I didn't have the necessary training or education to be technically competent, but as a young person, I feel like I was years ahead of people in terms of like maturity or having the interpersonal skills because I know myself well, right? And that's why I feel like that was so important when we were talking about learning about yourself and having that self-reflection, is that if you know yourself well, then you're not as fearful anymore
Right.
in a way. I don't know if you agree. And to sort of explain the young person's point of view, to put in another context. I'm in the engineering field. It's really technical, and I've seen companies where um, they have these like large operating manufacturing plants, right? And sometimes they hire young students and fresh graduates because they provide a fresh point of view, someone who hasn't had like decades of experience in that particular industry, because for someone to have worked in there for 30 years, they're used to it. They've gotten comfortable with the environment, and they know everything about it. Whereas if you have someone who's brand new, you'd be asking questions that are fresh, right? And so a lot of them, like maybe 90% of them, are just easy and what we coin as quote unquote dumb questions. But there's going to be like 10% of it where they're actually good questions and insightful questions from someone with a new point of view. And in terms of safety too, like a new person stepping into a an operation plant, like you're going to be hyper aware of all the risks around you, right? You're going to be so like so aware of what could kill you and what could injure you, whereas someone who's worked there for 30 years again might have gotten too comfortable with it. So that's where the young student brings value.
No, I totally agree, and I would also go on to say like I think going back to the question at hand, it's like how do you approach these mentors or these people with so much more professional experience than you if you're a student? It's oftentimes if you're looking for somebody to be a mentor, somebody to just ask general questions about their field of study or life experience, it's
Hmm.
you don't necessarily have to offer very specific, value where it's like, yeah, I can evaluate, your research project or your current, project for these professional individuals. Oftentimes, just being a student and asking for questions about how to get into their specific field is value enough, right? Because I think you mentioned this earlier. It's a lot of people, a lot of mentors will definitely find pride in being able to help more individuals get into their industry. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
There's always a
Yeah,
sense of fulfillment and
legacy, right?
yeah, there's always a sense of fulfillment and pride when you're able to help somebody, especially a young student,
Yeah.
not only realize their passion but also realize a passion that's similar to yours too.
Hmm. Jesse, let's talk about your podcast a little bit more. You said you were an introvert, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps you struggled with talking to people and connecting with others. What led you to starting your podcast, the Uncooked Rice Show?
Um. Okay, so I started the podcast as a passion project. I think, like most people, I don't know if this would be similar to you, but it's something that I wanted to explore. The idea of Asian culture, especially Asian American culture too, and in a Gen Z context too. And so that was something I wanted to explore. But I knew personally that I couldn't just look inwards to find that because, to be quite honest, I didn't know what it was, right? And so I knew I had to look outwards. And I say this a lot, but it's definitely easier to talk to other people about their life experiences and life journeys and insights when you invite them on a podcast rather than just randomly messaging them out of the blue and saying, "Hey, can I talk to you?" Because that's kind of weird, right? Um, but if you ask them to be on a podcast, it's more flattering than anything. Um,
Hmm.
but being an introvert, I think it's been a bit hard because this is all completely new to me, right? Like interviewing people, talking to strangers, and just trying to figure out, how do I have this, genuine conversation with somebody that I only just met like maybe 5 minutes ago, right? Or just had like our first conversation 5 minutes ago. And so
Hmm.
finding that was difficult. Finding out how to balance that was difficult, and it's definitely been a lot of trial and error.
Hmm.
Like I believe this you've done 16 episodes already by the time we're
Yeah.
recording this.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a lot of, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And, school doesn't teach this kind of shit.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're learning engineering or for me, it's economic policy. It doesn't teach you how to, talk to people and how to interview them. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And so yeah.
I mean, I've always valued conversations, like, and not just like any like friends, shooting the shit, right? Like it's actual conversations where we bounce off of each other's insights and experiences. And I've done really well in terms of like just connecting with people one on one.
Right.
With my former bosses, my supervisors, my friends, and I've always wanted to find people who are able to really bring value to the table, and also, like I said, I'm confident that I can bring value as well. Um, However, like COVID hit, right? Like, and we couldn't meet in person, we couldn't have coffee chats or lunches anymore. So I felt like a podcast was just a great medium for us to continue that conversation, right? Like we're having a good conversation one on one, and you bring a lot of value, Jesse. So I feel like the podcast is a really really good medium for people who really want to have a deep conversation and spend some time with people, and not necessarily people that but also people that you look up to, people who bring a lot of value to society, and you want to learn more about them. And I feel like the conversation will flow really really easily if you're really passionate about learning about the other person, and again bringing value to the conversation. Now, season 2 of your show was just released. The slogan for this season is "We're coming out more raw than ever before." I love that. You're going to be talking about topics like friendships, online school, activism, culture, and even online dating. Can you give us a preview of what to expect in season 2. I guess I shouldn't say preview because it's published now, but could you give us a brief sort of introduction to what to expect in all of the episodes throughout season 2?
Right. So, season one was a lot about me interviewing people and me trying to figure out what are people's life stories, and that was interesting, and that definitely is still interesting and something that I like to pursue. But for season two, my plan was to explore more broader topics that are more applicable to, I guess, the whole of society. So I wanted to make it more of a culture podcast than I guess, a what season one was more so of a job exploration or career path development sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for me, a lot about Gen Z that stands out to me is, finding identity, finding culture, and more personal things, right? So that was something I wanted to explore. And so for season two, what we're trying to do is for all these episodes, we're inviting people on that have these personal experiences, that it's not just about, technical skills or steps you have to follow, A, B, and C to get to, um, point Z or whatever you want to do. It's more about what can we learn as a society from the culture that we live in right now? What can we learn from these experiences? And what are some personal experiences that we can share to other people?
That's fantastic. I feel like it's so important. Representation is so important in today's society. Obviously, there's a lot of industries that um, still we don't see a lot of people that look like the two of us. So the work that you're doing is really important. Capturing the conversation that people in our society and our culture are saying, and really bringing the value to younger students and people that are younger than us, and helping them pave the way for their future. So, I really look forward to finishing season 2 of your podcast. I've listened to a couple of them, and you always bring a good conversation to the table. So, so to our listeners, please go check out the Uncooked Rice Show. Anywhere that you're listening to this episode right now, you can find Jesse's show. So Jesse, to end off, where can our listeners find the Uncooked Rice Show on social media, and how they interact with you if they have any questions?
So, like you said, like our podcast is on like all your favorite podcasting platforms. Anchor, Spotify, Apple
Mm-hmm.
Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Uncooked Rice Show, and you can find my personal Instagram at Jesse J Hsieh, or I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook as well.
Perfect. Wow, this has been such a good conversation. Even in part 1, part 2. I'd love to have a chat with you again in the near future. But in the meantime, best of luck with your studies at Carleton University, and obviously wishing you all the best on the Uncooked Rice Show. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much, Calvin.
And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of The Novice Experience, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Novice Experience. Our theme song is Concrete Jungle by Audio Binger. You can find us or reach out on social media at The Novice Exp. That's The Novice EXP. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on all your podcast listening platforms. Talk to you next time.